This might be a good place to put in an advertisement about what the National Association of Scholars is. Like AEI, the London Center, and Spiked, we have a very distinct voice. We are primarily a membership organization of academics. Some of you are here. Also, we welcome non-academics, we call public members, who are interested in our efforts to uphold the standards of liberal arts education that fosters intellectual freedom, searches for the truth, and promotes virtuous citizenship. Those are the words of our mission. Concretely, what we do is examine and critique emerging ideological trends in American higher education, the seemingly permanent or at least institutionalized follies that mark the field, and the ways in which higher education responds to the larger social and cultural challenges of our time. We're probably best known for our report 2 years ago, What Does Bowdoin Teach?, about a small liberal arts college in Maine. We've been doing this since 1987, which is coincidentally the same year that the Brundtland Commission issued its report, Our Common Future, which initiated the whole sustainability movement. Now, the sustainability movement has a few quirks worth mentioning. Lots of social movements begin on campus. This one didn't. This one began as an international movement among elites, and it took quite some time for it to reach the college campus. We are fortunate to have pretty much caught the moment when that happened, when it was in the early days of a transition from its preoccupation as something that transnational elites did to something that college students could do. Sustainability, remarkably, is just not the creation of campus activists, but it's a hand-me-down doctrine from the Brundtland commissioners, from the International Panel on Climate Change Directorate, the politicians who crowded to places like the Rio Summit in 1992, and so on. That backstory is really interesting. It's worth knowing, and you'll find it in the pages of our report, as well as the rather interesting story about how sustainability diverged from the older environmental movement with which it is still sometimes confused. Our focus is on sustainability in higher education for the reasons that Rochelle talked about. It's an ideology that, taken to extremes, undermines both the spirit and the substance of liberal learning. And taken to extremes is not just an idle metaphor. Sustainability activists are all about extremes. The debate is over, they say. The time for questions closed. The time for action now. And this means you. You still holding the cafeteria tray, you who want to read Jane Austen rather than Bill McKibben, who are sipping water from a plastic bottle, you who have yet to reduce your carbon footprint to size 0 AAA. The seeming trivialities of the movement do matter, as Rochelle said, because they are part of a systematic effort to nudge students first into behavioral conformity and second and more importantly into psychological and intellectual conformity. That's the deep misuse of higher education to indoctrinate rather than to educate students. We focus on higher ed not just because we're breaking down a more complex subject, but also because the university is the pivot point. It shapes the mind and character of generations to come, and it shapes their ideas about what their leadership should look like for the nation and the world. That said, higher education is still only one player in the larger sustainability movement. Our report touches only lightly on the United Nations and other international bodies, although they set and continue to set much of the international agenda of the movement. Likewise, sustainability is now firmly planted in public schools. Last Friday, 1,200 middle school students trudged through the latest snowstorm to the United Nations General Assembly, I'm quoting CBS News, to hear hip-hop singer and producer Pharrell Williams, that's the happiness guy, talk about climate change. Some of them were from Growing Up Green Charter School, which focuses on climate change. One little boy, Marquis Jamont, explained, "Without Pharrell, our planet would not survive." There's the sustainability movement reduced to perfection. One could write a whole report on this, but we haven't. When the planet is doomed, you have to select your targets carefully. We likewise have said very little about the role of commerce and government in advancing the sustainability agenda. I would, however, like to draw your attention to an important appendix of our report by the international trade lawyer Lawrence Kogan, who has done path-breaking work on how the intertwining of growing regulatory regimes and the scientific establishment have become part of this. Mr. Kogan's research sketches what might be called, or at least I'm going to try to call it, the green environmental military industrial complex. We put military in there because, as you may have noticed, the Pentagon now officially considers climate change what it calls a threat multiplier. We are standing down from military threats around the world to face the phantom danger of rising sea levels. This gives new meaning to Hamlet's dilemma, you know, to take arms against a sea of troubles. Herb, London and the London Center, I expect, will deal with this tentacle of the sustainability movement. We don't. One last thing before I open the floor to questions. I would like to thank our principal supporter for this work, Arthur Roop, and the Roop Foundation. And I'd like to thank the Weiler Foundation for its additional support for our economic analysis of the sustainability movement, some of which you just heard. Norm Rogers, a member of our board of directors, has also been a source of excellent counsel as well as financial support. And Adam Kissel, then at FIRE, was the first to spot the University of Delaware's peculiar use of the word sustainability as an umbrella for political indoctrination. That's what set this in motion. Thanks too to our allies, the Heartland Institute. Aaron Stover is here representing that important organization, and Larry Kogan, who I just mentioned. There are quite a few other small independent groups working on sustainability from a number of angles. As far as higher education goes, we are the only player. There are about a dozen groups of conservative libertarian nature in the United States that work on higher education reform and cultural issues broadly. None of them will touch this issue. You can think about why that's the case, but for 7 years we've been doing it, and I'm really, really proud of the report that Rochelle has given us. I hope you do take copies when you leave, and we will now open the floor to questions. I hope you have some.